Hello everyone and welcome to Fieldfisher's new Brexit webinar series. Today we'll be covering an overview of the Brexit negotiations, so looking at where we are, where we're going and what you can do to prepare for all the different eventualities. And given all the recent events in recent times in this time early in September, hopefully a very timely and useful webinar for you. Now this session is the first in a series of webinars hosted by Fieldfisher's Brexit Taskforce. Each webinar will be about 30 to 35 minutes. It's designed to be bite-sized, taking place every Thursday at 10 a.m. for the next 9 weeks, designed to cover cross-cutting issues affecting all businesses and companies, and really looking at the significant developments in those areas and offering some practical advice to businesses and organizations in this ever-changing and difficult political environment. As I said, today we'll be taking a look at the overview of the Brexit process. And my name is Andy Hood. I'm a partner at the Fieldfisher Regulatory and Trade Team here in London, and I head up the Fieldfisher's Brexit Task Force. I spent a lot of time in government, including 3 years in Brussels, representing the UK and EU negotiations. And before I left government, I spent 2 years as General Counsel at Number 10 with David Cameron. Now, at this point in my introduction, I normally say it's not my fault, because I'm conscious that whatever your personal views on Brexit, this has caused a lot of difficulty and a lot of uncertainty for nearly every company. But I left about 5 years ago, and a lot of that time I spent working with companies, really trying to navigate the Brexit process and try to prepare for these eventualities that are coming to a head right now. A bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions, please use the question box in your control panel. It's on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll aim to get through as many of those as possible in the course of this webinar. If I don't get time to answer them all, then I or one of the team will follow up with you individually. All of our sessions are recorded and available on the Fieldfisher website and exciting YouTube channel, and we'll have those details for you at the end of the session if you really want to watch this all over again. So let's get started. I want to cover 6 main topics in the course of the next 25-30 minutes, set out on the screen for you there, but really sort of grouped into 3 main areas, one of which is looking at where we are, then what does it all really mean and how can I prepare? So looking at where we are, I just want to take a step back a little and just look at the overview. We all get very consumed with the latest news of the moment, but let's just look at the bigger context. And in fact, the context starts before this slide, back in the 31st of January 2020, when the UK formally, legally left the EU. Now, for most of us, that has not meant a great deal of change because the withdrawal agreement itself provided for this transition period through to the end of 2020. That means business as usual for nearly all companies. And it provides an opportunity for the UK and the EU to negotiate a new future trading agreement. In theory, that ought to be ready within the next 6 to 8 weeks. And informally, both sides have really agreed that that deal needs to be in place by the end of October, if they're to allow sufficient time for the internal processes at both the EU and UK level for these internal measures to be put in place for a new trading relationship in January. Now, if that's not possible, the withdrawal agreement did allow for an extension of the negotiation period, but that needs to be exercised by the end of June. It wasn't exercised, and so from January 2021, we should be in a new trading relationship of some description with the EU. But what really does come next? What does January look like? There are 3 main scenarios. The first of which, as I said, is there is an extension beyond December 2020 of the transition period. So business as usual continues whilst the negotiations carry on. Now, as I said, that wasn't extended in June when the withdrawal agreement provided for. It doesn't mean that both sides couldn't agree to extend that further, but actually, because within UK law, it is written down that the transition period will end at the end of 2020, and the politics within the UK means I think that's just very unlikely. So what does that leave us? It leaves us with the obvious first option, which is there is no deal at all and no trade deal between the UK and the EU, which means they'll operate effectively on WTO terms, what I call the first building block of trade between the UK and the EU. And really that means you'll have tariffs on goods, only limited access for trade, a lot of extra paperwork, and limited access for services for the big service providers from the UK into the EU, and vice versa. Of course, it will affect all companies in the EU trading with the UK or using the UK as part of their supply chain. But I've put the World Trade Organization in inverted commas because actually there's a second building block we should take into account, the other international obligations. So where the UK and the EU align on those international obligations, I think I would also add that into the, sort of the core building blocks of that would govern our trading relationship with them in the future. So whether that's commitments on tax within the OECD context, or environment and regulatory commitments made in the context of, say, the Kyoto Protocol and Kyoto Agreement, all will govern the sort of the key interrelationships of the UK and the EU. But of course, the big prize is not just a cherry on top, but really the meat and bones of any trading relationship is a new agreement between the UK and the EU. And in fact, bilateral agreements more generally are really the main substance and the main prize for trading nations, to design to eliminate not only tariffs but different regulatory contexts and different regulatory requirements, as well as a whole host of access to the market for services and service provisions across borders. So a huge deal. And just we'll spend most of the time today looking at the UK-EU trading relationship, but just to flag and to recall that actually there will be a big change in January at the end of the transition period between the UK and the rest of the world. So at the moment, the UK trades with Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Canada, about more than 60 countries on terms specifically that specifically arise because of the UK's membership of the EU and because of the trading relationship between the EU and those other countries. When the transition period ends, those trading relationships formally end. Now, the UK has spent a lot of time trying to roll over those agreements or try to renegotiate them, and it's succeeded in part, and in other parts it hasn't succeeded. So if you've got an international footprint for your operations or an international supply chain, then understanding exactly what those agreements look like between the UK and the rest of the world will be crucial for understanding the administrative burdens you may have to face or the tariff obligations that could exist. So really looking at that wider world. So that's the international view of where we will be from January. On the domestic view, there are four main areas of legislation to take a look at. I won't spend too much time today, simply because the next in the webinar series is going to be hosted by Eleanor Doose, who spent some time actually drafting a lot of these regulations and laws whilst in government, and she's joined Fieldfisher recently, and I'm delighted that she'll be presenting the next in the series. So not to spend too much time, but just to put it in the bigger context. And really, I think I'd focus in particular on that first line. The EU Withdrawal Act of 2018 is designed really to map across EU law at the time of exit into the UK. So all those regulations that are directly applicable now in the EU and govern how you might manufacture a product or how you are regulated as a service provider will map across into the UK law. Now, of course, there are some technical changes when you do that are required, and we've seen that in the 600 or more EU exit regulations the government has drafted. The difficulty there, of course, is although in theory they should be technical, actually some of those I think really do bring in some quite substantive changes to the areas of law that they govern, and insofar as they affect and govern your business, it's good and important to know what those are. And those regulations not only capture, I think, some pretty substantive changes, but also they were drafted in, frankly, a hurry. Before all the extensions to the Brexit negotiations, these regulations were in place. And of course, there is limited time for parliamentary oversight. And of course, people make errors. And so understanding what those regulations are and just double checking that they mean that you can continue your business as usual is important for any company, I think, to be prepared for January 2021. Similarly, there are new domestic legislative frameworks around the trade bill, agricultural bill, and I put the internal market bill there, which we've heard a lot about in recent days. Of course, it was inevitable that in any negotiation or any preparations for January 2021, undertaking the necessary domestic legislation for the Northern Ireland Protocol would be essential. Of course, now we see it as much more of a part of a bargaining chip between the UK and the EU. And then, of course, crucially at the end, if any deal is reached, we'll need new legislation put in place between the UK and the EU for 2021 to give effect to that trade deal. So what does all this mean for you and for us as businesses? Well, the answer is quite a lot. the impact of Brexit is going to differ from sector to sector and from company to company. And what we've pulled together here is some of the key areas we found in the last 3 to 4 years where clients are often affected. And the idea behind our Brexit webinar series is to really to pull out some of these deep cross-cutting issues and to do a deeper dive in a bite-sized webinar over the next 9 weeks. So I don't want to do that here, but just to flag that there are a whole host of different areas where this can affect your company. And of course, it can vary from sector to sector. The regulatory compliance, for example, for the financial services firm is going to be very different from those who manufacture widgets and export it to the EU. But of course, some will also be really cross-cutting and affect everyone. So if you're a UK-based firm employing EU nationals, understanding your obligations from January in terms of undertaking the necessary employer checks, but also supporting employees through the settled status or the pre-settled status scheme. Contracts are going to affect everybody. How they affect you and how you want to use contracts to mitigate your risk is going to be particular to your company. But of course, I think nearly every company is going to be affected through its contractual obligations by Brexit, and just having a sense of those and reviewing that is going to be important. So frankly, there is a lot of areas where Brexit can affect your company, whether you're based in the UK, trading with the UK, or using it as a base for stepping stone into the EU, or have it as a supply chain. Now, that could be quite daunting. I'm conscious that comedy slides are not very good on many webinar presentations, but I put this in because I'm conscious that actually the impact can be very broad, and set against the background of an uncertain political environment. The question is, well, what can I really do in order to prepare for this? And that's what I want to just look at briefly now, some practical steps. I think firstly, assess. And so really understand what the Brexit timeframes and options mean for you as a business. And hopefully this will help unpack some of that for you in the course of this webinar. We've talked about the Brexit, the potential extension, which would be business as usual as it is now. But the fact that is not very likely means that it's worth investing some time and energy into looking at the different scenarios between a deal and a no trade deal. And again, we've talked about the no trade deal and the context of the WTO and international rules that would govern your trading relationship after Brexit and from the January 2021, but also the deal. You may choose to wait next 6 to 8 weeks to see if there is a deal, and if so, what it says. But for those of you keen to look a bit further ahead and to get started now, you can start to look at where the two proposals start to overlap. So in the case of business travel, for example, both the UK and the EU proposals suggest that it will be possible for business travellers to travel visa-free between the two jurisdictions from January 2021. Now, one of those proposals says you can do that for up to 3 months, and another says up to 6 months, and so there may be a time difference to be worked through. But we would know at this stage that if there is a deal, it is designed to allow visa-free business travel from January 2021. So the stuff you can start to do now and to look at what the detail of that agreement will be come October. Next key thing is to plan. And it may be that many of you have done this and taken this step, but I have to say that where I've worked with clients that have been most successful and most prepared, they really have taken a lot of care over their planning for Brexit. And in particular, they pulled together a good team. So understanding where Brexit may impact your business most centrally often is what drives preparations for Brexit. But actually, as we've looked at, there are so many cross-cutting issues affecting supply chains, people and HR issues, contract and commercial management, to taxes, to your entire structure where you may be physically based. So putting together the right team, able to advise the board at short notice and to monitor developments is going to be pretty important. Secondly, of course, looking at the impact of Brexit on your business, and also then prioritising. So I'm conscious that you don't want to, say, boil the ocean in preparing for Brexit, and there are so many things you could be doing, but actually navigating what really matters to you as a business and how to prepare for the key issues, whether it's recognizing you need to update your contracts, but some will be more central to your business than others, or some will be a model contract compared to the myriad of other disparate and slightly different contracts that may apply. It's just a means of prioritizing your efforts and your energies, identifying what will be necessary and what will change come what may, in which case you need to start preparing at some point, and it may as well be now. For example, if you're exporting goods, there's going to be a much bigger administrative burden come January 2021 in terms of import or export declarations. Do you know how to do those? That's going to happen whether we have a deal or not. So understanding what is the likelihood of the deal, that assessment and understanding point, can really help you prioritize what you need to be doing. And then, of course, it's operationalizing that. Corporate practical steps, whether it's setting up a shell organization and ready to go on day one at minimal cost in an EU jurisdiction if you're based in the UK, or vice versa, can provide some reassurance for you, for clients, and for your workforce to understand what the potential implications may be. Looking at your workforce, understanding how dependent you are upon EU skills and labour if you're based in the UK, and vice versa if you're based in the EU and reliant upon UK personnel in your offices there. So a whole range of practical steps and issues you can be doing to really start to prepare for Brexit, and then using that to manage risk. And I've put down here the contract review and updating, because of course at one level it simply has to be done if you've got a clause that refers to the EU, and in fact that actually is designed to refer to the EU and the UK now we've legally left. That needs to be updated, so there's some nuts and bolts work there. But there's also, I think, the key thing, which is using contracts where I've worked with clients to manage and mitigate some of those risks that might be out there. So if you are supplying goods from the UK to the EU and there might be tailbacks and a delay in that provision, who bears the risk of that? If you've got a logistics provider hired and in place, and that delay is 2 to 3 days, that's a massive impact upon their business and potentially on your business and on how you supply and work with customers. But who bears the risk of that? One practical example where your contract reviews and using your contractual relationships might help manage and mitigate those risks for you. And the other point I emphasize is supply chain management, because you can be really prepared, and I've had cases where clients have been as prepared as you possibly can be as through the different iterations of Brexit negotiations. But then they're faced with clients in the EU or elsewhere in the UK or in the supply chain who really don't understand what's going on, haven't followed it closely, or frankly, sometimes have just got it wrong. And so are they prepared? Are they ready for Brexit? Do they understand the implications of Brexit, and are they ready for it? Because if you're ready, but your suppliers aren't, that can have, of course, a massive impact on you. And so simply asking some sometimes light touch questions to identify there are any red flags out there, and then drilling down with those suppliers or service providers where necessary is going to be crucial. And as I say, it doesn't apply just to suppliers, but those you might be dependent upon for providing services, such as data centers, for example. Are they ready and prepared, and do they understand? And here's a slide with, frankly, a lot of words. And the point, I suppose, is you can take this away and revisit this through our YouTube channel if you want to. But I suppose my main point here is there is lots that can be done. Now, you don't want to do all of it necessarily, and if you've done that understanding, planning and prioritizing process, you won't necessarily need to do all of it. But in the last 3 to 4 weeks, I and our task force have advised companies on all of these areas, because there is lots you can do to plan to mitigate those risks, whether it's in contract reviews, staff audits, assessments of regulation, thinking about how you structure yourself as a company, or how you plan your IP protections in light of Brexit. All basic practical steps, pretty low input required. And so again, really just thinking outside of it's all too difficult, and going down into the granular sometimes can help in terms of thinking through practical steps that can be taken. And so who can help? Well, there are some public resources available. So if you want to know what's going on, the sort of the core nuts and bolts, especially for the lawyers amongst us, you can look at the European Commission and UK government website. There they provide actually pretty good up-to-date position papers on both sides, particularly looking at what would happen in the case of no deal and now no trade deal scenarios, but also, of course, setting up the core text that both sides have put forward as part of their negotiation for a new trade deal. So, if you do want to go to the core source, those are as good as it gets, frankly, because the policy will change. There's lots of updates and announcements we hear, but actually there's some of the detailed nitty-gritty is in those papers. But also, of course, you've got Fieldfisher and our Brexit Taskforce team. As I said, we've pulled together some lessons learned, frankly, over the last 3 to 4 years with clients, and we've put that and boiled it down into a 3 to 4 page practical checklist. I don't pretend that will cover every issue for every company, but it really helps, I think, get the juices flowing to think through some areas that you've not perhaps thought about, or at least are a bit tangential to your core business, but actually end up being an important part of your Brexit preparations. So a practical checklist, my details at the end of this webinar, and by all means, please send me an email and I'll be happy to send it off. Similarly, we've done a bit of a deeper dive on one of those areas around contracts and contract preparations. So thinking about whether that's managing 2P and employment issues to GDPR data to foreign exchange or other concerns and jurisdictional territorial clauses and issues that might arise as a nitty-gritty preparation for Brexit and contract preparations, as well as how you can use them to manage and mitigate your risks. We've got a Fieldfisher blog on Brexit, and there, rather than simply try to follow the news on all these areas, we've tried to do a deep dive into some sort of specific core areas of interest, and you can see from the screen grab on the slide, this covers anything from tariff regimes to franchising, trademarks, IP protection, how it affects particular sectors, whether it be the tech sector, the oil and gas sector, the financial services, or what have you, all of which are covered on our blog and available through our website. We've got a Brexit Taskforce hotline, so if you've got any questions, you just want to pick up the phone and have a sense check, very happy for me or one of the team to speak to you through that hotline. And of course, the Brexit webinar series, which, as I said, is designed to be a bit of a deeper dive, hopefully in a bite-sized, digestible way into some of these areas, and will be available online afterwards. So I would say, get any questions in you have as we go through. We come towards an end of the sort of formal presentation. I don't want to keep it too long, but there is the team. But of course, they then have networks into the rest of our expertise, be it sectoral or cross-cutting areas of interest and expertise, and are happy to help at any time. So, are there any questions? I'll pull up our question sheet. I won't name those who've asked to keep it Chatham House, at least for those asking questions. I'm conscious that my face is on screen and this will be recorded, but one of the questions that was posed is, what, if anything, will the impact of recent events, I think in particular the Internal Market Bill and the Northern Ireland Protocol is being referred to, what impact will that have on negotiations and what does it mean for January? Well, it's a good question. I think although we're all focused on the now, I sort of feel like we shouldn't be 11-year-olds playing football where everyone chases after the ball and doesn't look at the bigger picture. And frankly, we've had a lot of these different negotiation issues, a lot of the different political disruptions over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. And if anything, it's shown how difficult this can be, and it's not simply a walk in the park, as some have suggested. But I think it may well be a negotiating tactic. I get the impression negotiations are quite difficult at the moment. And there's still a lot of work to be done if we are to get a deal in place. So there's a lot of uncertainty. I think this simply adds to uncertainty and frankly, therefore, adds to the importance of preparing for a no-deal scenario in your planning. And actually, the no-deal scenario planning is a good way to think through, what is the worst case? What does that mean for my business? And really, what do I therefore need to prioritize? And how do I mitigate some of those risks? If there is a deal on top of that, then great. It means either that's some work and some energy that you can put to one side because you've got some security and knowledge in what the deal is. But as I said, at the moment, I don't think, even if we have a deal, it's not going to be a really comprehensive, in-depth arrangement in place. At best, we may start to see a framework for how relationships on regulations and conformity assessments, for example, might be put in place and agreed between the parties in the coming months and years ahead. But we're probably going to have very little in terms of substantive in-depth assessments and in-depth arrangements in place come January 2021. Hopefully some, and they could be quite significant if we get the deal right, but it may well be that we don't see as much as we would otherwise hope for. Another question: will the UK-EU deal cover how EU laws comply in the UK, or will this mainly be done mainly a trade and withdrawal divorce deal? That's a good question. I think the divorce deal is a great analogy, actually, one you often hear. The divorce deal was done, that's a withdrawal agreement, and that really was looking at how we deal with people, money, and Northern Ireland. And that deal was done by this current Prime Minister under the government just over a year ago. The future relationship about EU laws and how they comply and how they apply in the UK is really a matter of UK law, and that's by and large then mapping across into UK law through this EU Withdrawal Act of 2018, all the laws that apply now, with the modifications through these EU exit regulations. So that's a sort of key area to go to in terms of looking at what the law will be in the UK from 2021. And then where the trade deal works is sort of layering on top of that. So all things being equal, we may have a regulation for widgets that you must produce widgets in a certain way. And actually, we know they're going to reflect EU law because that EU law is mapped across into UK law at the time. But how do I export that widget to the EU? Do I have to pay a tariff when I export that widget to the EU? We don't know. That will be dealt with in the trade deal. If it's not in the trade deal, then we look at what the WTO says in terms of tariffs for that particular widget. But also, when I put the widget on the market, do I have to have it assessed and confirmed by an EU-based operator, or will they recognise the fact that it's been compliant with UK law and overseen perhaps by a UK regulator? Again, at the moment, without a trade deal, you may have to get it verified in both jurisdictions in order for it to be able to be placed on and sold in the market of both the UK and the EU. If we have a trade deal, it means that you wouldn't have to get a compliance in both places. They could start to recognise the approvals given in each jurisdiction. So that's where the interrelationship of domestic law and the trade deal really come together. There was a proposal at MFN tariffs that would be 0% duties on materials used in manufacturing process. I can't see this in the final global UK tariff data. Is this in place, or will there be tariffs? Great, straight into the nitty-gritty. There was a suggestion at various times, both under the May government and under the Johnson government, that in the event of a no deal, which is no withdrawal agreement, and we sort of crashed out of the EU back in November last year, there was a suggestion at that point that the UK would have 0% tariffs for a limited period on a number of different products and goods. And that was designed to smooth out, it was in the UK's gift, and it was designed to smooth out the transition between membership of the EU and non-membership of the EU. And those tariffs, because it couldn't apply just to the EU, under WTO law, they would have to get the same benefit to goods coming from the EU, but from every other country. There was going to be a 0% tariff in some key product areas in the event of a no deal and in the event the UK crashed out. What the UK government has now said is that, well, that was for an emergency situation of a no deal crash at the end of last year. But actually now, you know it's been coming. You've been able to prepare as businesses and as firms for this. So we don't think this is necessary. And actually, that's why I think we start to see a difference between what the UK has said about a year ago, as we were preparing for a potential no deal, and what we're looking at now, where we may have no trade deal between the UK and the EU. The government has said, and not only here, but also in terms of other arrangements around administrative requirements for import and exports. They've said, actually, that was for a year ago. The situation now is much different. You've had time to prepare. We're not going to give you 0% tariffs. So you need to look at what the UK tariff schedule would be within the WTO to understand what the tariff arrangements will be between the UK and the EU in January 2021. I hope that answers that question. And I'll pick up one final question. From your experience in government, it's always a worrying start. Do you believe that efforts will be made in practice to minimise divergence from EU legislation in order to minimise the adverse impact on business or the principle of UK sovereignty and our own right to apply our rules apply regardless? So effectively, will we try and adopt similar rules to the EU in order to smooth out that the potential divergence between the UK and the EU? Now, as the question alludes to, there's been a great deal of political rhetoric around the UK sovereignty and our right to create our own laws. And in fact, that has manifested itself in some difficult negotiations, because keeping that sovereignty but without providing the details of what we will do with that sovereignty, be it on state aid or regulation, for example, means the EU is saying, well, how do we know what that will be, and why would we trust what you say it will be in order to give you the benefits of trade, and vice versa, potentially. So we don't know exactly what the UK will do at this stage, but my feeling is a lot of it should be governed and driven by industry, by business, by hearing from you what you want. Now, of course, many businesses said they want to remain in the EU, and of course that's not where we are. So beyond reliving past arguments, what is it you want to see in terms of that regulatory compliance and adherence to current EU laws and regulations? I don't think you're going to find a framework that says we are simply going to map across our law based on EU developments, but actually, as a practical measure, the key bits of legislation that affect you as companies, the more you engage with government and the more you try and actively manage that process and manage the best outcome for you, the better. So the short answer is, I think they will probably try and manage the UK regulatory system to keep it as aligned as possible with the EU, but it's still going to cause some difficulties. And of course, it does mean there may be opportunities for slight tweaks around the edges where one can see a benefit of diverging from the EU law for UK industry and UK business, but there might be ramifications and impacts of that beyond the immediate regulation. And then final question, can you give insight into the requirements in terms of safety testing regulations following the end of the transition period and the requirement to have an EU importer? That's a very good question, and I know the author, so I'll perhaps follow up directly with you. The safety testing regulations at the moment, there have been various changes in the UK position, particularly around, for example, safety marking. So at one point, the UK was going to require a UK CE equivalent marking. That advice was withdrawn. It was reinstated back in August. So at the moment, the government's position has changed a little around some of these issues, and it's actually that's a good example of where you need to do a bit of deep diving into what that would mean in any given case in order to understand how to prepare for it and the different eventualities come January 2021. So it gets quite technical and quite into the weeds quite quickly. So I'll follow up with you directly on that. But listen, I hope that was helpful as a starting point, as an overview for Brexit. I am conscious that there are a million different questions that we could have that could follow. What I do want to just flag, though, is to our upcoming series. So the next in our series is, as I said, UK legislation after Brexit and navigating retained EU law. As I said, I hope you can join us next week when Eleanor will be covering that subject. I said, I'm excited to have Eleanor presenting on that topic because she's a former government lawyer and in fact drafted a number of the key bits of legislation, including the EU Withdrawal Act. So you'll hear directly from the drafter and you'll be able to put all the difficult questions to her. All that leaves me to say is thank you very much. I will follow up the questions that haven't been answered in the course of today. But if you want any further details, you've got my contact details. If you'd like a copy of our practical checklist, by all means, drop me a line. I'll be happy to send it through. This and the future webinars will be available on our YouTube channel. That just leaves me to say thank you very much for joining and have a very good day. Thanks.